Thanks so much. Yeah. Hey, thanks so much. Thanks for coming out tonight. Thank you for coming out. It's countless trips. I'll never forget my first one. Long before I got in this, stopped at Poppy's, right? Representative Breckenridge. So good to see you here. But I really appreciate all of you being here as well. And I think that there's incredible excitement across this state for all of these candidates, right? Because for the sake of our nation and our nation's standing in the world and what we're going to pass on that next generation, no matter what, we've got to make sure that Donald Trump's a one-term president, for sure. To me, though, it's about more than just beating him. It's soundly rejecting this behavior that he's normalized. It's those lies, it's those misstatements, it's the abuse of power. It's dividing our nation by race, by gender, by geography, by nationality. It's the fact that we now truly expect more out of our preschoolers than our President of the United States. Who would have ever thought we'd get to that point, right? To me, though, as I've traveled, I see more than just that. I see a lot of people working a lot harder and making a lot less. 60% of Americans haven't had a pay increase in real terms in 40 years. When I was growing up in the early 70s, 90% of 30-year-olds were doing better than their parents were. Today, it's only half at age 30. Or you look at 2/3 of the counties in this country actually lost businesses over the last decade, and folks saying, shouldn't have to leave my place of worship or my school or my community just to make a decent living. And then when the economy's not working for people, they look at the political system for relief. And it's captured by money. It's captured by dark money. Think about, for this case called Citizens United, which I'll talk a little bit about, 2% of all outside spending was from groups that don't disclose their donors. It's 2018 midterms is over half. Where you see environmental regulations being gutted because that's what the oil companies want. You see Washington, D.C. that's not working for people. It's no wonder that people are frustrated, they're anxious, they're angry. Instead of doing something about that, Donald Trump's poured gasoline on that fire. We are more divided today than at any time in my lifetime. Forget about cable news, forget about Twitter. Think about conversations even around a coffee shop or a Thanksgiving dinner where politics divides us in our communities and our country. And that's not the promise of America. I think that we're better than that. Look, my background, briefly raised in a single-parent household, paycheck to paycheck. I only knew there was a governor's house in town because I delivered newspapers to it as a kid. So I've made it literally 4 blocks in life from where I graduated. But I went to a small college, not much, well, actually smaller than here in Grinnell. A small college called Claremont McKenna College in Southern California. But the thought of even college visits were beyond my family's means. But I worked my way through college, and I borrowed my way through law school. I'll never forget that day my wife and I paid off what would be $175,000 in today's terms of student debt. Yeah, it impacted what I could do along the way, but still I had that shock from going from delivering newspapers to governor's house as a kid to now raising our 3 kids in it. And you got to recognize for so many people in that country, that fair shot at a better life no longer exists. And we also have to be honest, for a lot of communities, especially communities of color, that shot never has existed in this country. So yeah, it's about beating Donald Trump, but it's also about making people believe that the economy and Washington, D.C. can actually work for them. We have to be able to do both. Do we have any single issue voters? What's your single issue?
Mental health care.
Important, and I'll talk about that in questions then. Because I am definitely a single issue voter. And that single issue is beating Donald Trump, no matter what happens. No matter what happens. As referenced in 2016, I was the only Democrat in the country to get reelected in a state where Donald Trump won. He took Montana by 20, I won by 4. 25 to 30% of my voters voted for Donald Trump. And I think what we got to recognize through this election is the path to victory, it doesn't just run through our coasts and our urban areas. If we can't win back some of those places we lost, no matter what we do along the way, it's not going to change us. You in Iowa, you see a lot of candidates, you're well-seasoned, reasonably skeptical, you shouldn't count on promises from any of us. Here's my promise. If I'm the nominee, I'm going to win Massachusetts and California. Any Democrat with a pulse will win Massachusetts and California. But if we can't make connections in rural areas, a third of your counties voted Obama, Trump, including this county right here. And this election becomes, and where's Ivy Schuster came in right at the end. Ivy run for state senate right now. This election becomes not only about the White House, but also the State House. Because who we have at the top matters. Because what you see time and time again is you end up in a place where you have a legislature that's gutting education, that's cutting health care, that's taking away democracy rights, women's rights along the way. It matters every piece of the way, and I refuse to see the votes of rural areas as if folks who work the land and feed the world and pass a plate on a Sunday are forever going to be wedded to a New York con man with orange hair and a gold toilet. I don't have that luxury in Montana of just going those pockets of blue. I have to go all across that state. And that's what we have to look at along the way. I'm a pro-choice, pro-union, populist Democrat who won actually 3 elections in a red state, not by compromising values, but by getting things done. My legislature's more Republican than yours in Iowa. And I'm sorry, Representative Breckenridge, because I know it's not easy already in your world. But even with that, we've expanded health care to 100,000 people through Medicaid expansion. And we did it by not privatizing the system. We have mental health and physical health parity through insurance and others. We've kicked dark money out of our elections. We have the 4th lowest college tuition and fees in the nation. And we've done that by freezing college tuition, but investing more into higher education. We've also recognized not everybody's going to go to college. So we've made our 2-year colleges and our tribal colleges about apprenticeships and professionally recognized certificates. That way folks can actually climb the ladder in the middle class. As a result, people are climbing in the middle class at a rate higher in Montana than any state in the country. And I've done that by trying to find common ground with those Republican legislators, but that doesn't mean we have to compromise values that we as Democrats hold. 24th governor of Montana, I have more vetoes than any governor in the history by quite a bit. Stopped every attack on a woman's right to make her own health care decisions, because that should be the woman's, not the legislature's. Before I got into all of this, I was a union-side labor lawyer. We're still a state where you can organize and collectively bargain for better wages and working conditions. I've worked with your buddy Nick on keeping our public lands in public hands, stopping any efforts to roll back environmental protections. Now, how I've won and how I govern are much the same. I'll never forget, we were trying to get Medicaid expansion through, it was in 2015. I went to this town called Choteau, Montana. Choteau has about 1,700 people in it. It's along the Rocky Mountain front. I go up there and literally everyone in town knew why I was going to be there, because the Koch brothers, Americans for Prosperity, were kind enough to give them all mailers with a picture of Barack Obama and Steve Bullock, and our cheeks were touching. So Bullock and Obama are coming to your town, destroy your healthcare system. But showed up anyway. Instead of just telling them what they need, I let them talk. First person that got up and spoke said, he was a hospital administrator, he said 43% of the people that walk through these doors don't have health insurance. A few people got up afterwards, called me an Obama loving this, socialist, whatever it might be, but it's probably the 5th speaker, 5th or 6th. He was the chair of the county commission, county supervisors, and he wasn't even from, he was an old rancher, he wasn't even from Choteau. He's from a town called Bynum, population 50, kind of a suburb of Choteau, right? But he got up and he goes, folks, I was born in this hospital. This hospital saved my life 2 years ago when I had a heart attack. And if we lose this hospital, this town's gone. So instead of me coming from the State House and telling them what they need, by letting them talk, that's what gave that Republican legislator the courage to defy the Koch brothers, defy party leadership, vote for it when every single vote mattered. We went from 20% uninsured to 7% today. 20% of rural hospitals in this country are at risk of closing right now. We haven't lost a one. I always begin with this base presumption, right, that most folks' lives are too busy or frantic or hectic to care about politics. But everybody wants a safe community, a roof over their head, a decent job, clean air, clean water, good public schools, and the belief you can do better for that next generation than yourself. And those are the values that the Democratic Party has always fought for. So be it urban or rural, coastal or what some people would pejoratively say is the flyover state, if we're connecting with those values, that's how we can win these elections. I think both the way that I've been able to win and govern could teach Washington, D.C. a few things. I know many of you think, Montana's just a small populated state. Somewhere west of us, it's got greater population than states like Vermont or Delaware. Just saying for consideration. But unless we're willing to take on what's holding D.C. back in so many ways, and that really is the corrupting influence of money in the system, everything else Democrats are talking about right now is going to be that much harder to attain. Think about it when Lindsey Graham says, we have to get these tax cuts through to make our donors happy. Same time that 44% of Americans would have $400 in their bank account or pocket if they face a medical emergency or the car broke down. We pay more for prescription drugs than any country in the world. And we have nothing to show for it. Costco can negotiate drug prices. It's against the law for the federal government to do so. We've now replaced a generation of workers with independent contractors. Same time that union membership's half of what it was in the 1980s. And oil companies are doing pretty darn good as far as making money. The Republican Party is now the only political party of significance in the world that does acknowledge that climate change is impacted by human beings. All of that, gun violence and gun safety, all of these issues can track back in some ways to the amount of outside spending, the corruption of money in this system. I think something can be done about it. I've seen it done. We actually did it in Montana. I was Attorney General before I was governor. And this little case called Citizens United came down. Remember, that's the case that said corporations are people and money is speech. When that case came down, literally every state in the country said, game over, absolutely nothing you can do. Montana at the time, or actually Democrats at the time, controlled both houses of Congress and the White House. Folks gave speeches about it, they decried it. But they didn't do it, they raised money off of it. They didn't do a darn thing. Montana had this dark history of these wealthy copper barons. They owned copper mines. We call them the Copper Kings. They controlled every local, state, and federal election in our state, to the point that it's even known beyond Montana. Mark Twain talked about one of these dudes. His name was William Clark. He goes, Clark buys politicians like most people buy food. By his example, corruption no longer has an offensive smell in the state of Montana. And regular folks finally said it's enough's enough. And they passed a law that said corporations can't spend or contribute in our elections. We also have the second lowest contribution limits in the country. So elections for 100 years from that time that the initiative was passed until Citizens United were about this. It wasn't about how much money you raised. It was people talking to people. So I knew I had to do something along the way. And I put together the first case after Citizens United and took it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. I even had testimony from former Republican statewide office holders just talking about what the threat of this spending could do to what happens at our state house. So excited, never forget, get up to the U.S. Supreme Court, lost on a 5-4 decision. 100 years of Montana law thrown out. Taught me two things. One, don't ever doubt what one justice can do when it comes to our democracy, it comes to women's rights, workers' rights, environmental protections. It also taught me, though, if that's at the core of everything else, you still got to figure out a way. So I went back to that legislature at the time that was 2/3 Republican and said, we passed this law that said 90 days out from an election, I don't care if you call yourself Americans for America, whatever it is. If you're going to spend in the elections, you have to disclose all the money that you spend and all the money that you contribute. Never forget, I'm running for re-election in 2016, and about 93 days out, Americans for Prosperity, the Koch brothers, did one of those mailings across our state that was so well targeted it even shows up in the governor's house. And my 3 kids are looking at this. They're like, Dad, are you really that much of a creep? But then on day 90, it stopped. All of it stopped. And if we can kick the Koch brothers out of Montana, we can do it in Iowa, we can do it in Washington, D.C. I had this little modest proposal that we rolled out not that long ago. You know, we send folks to DC. How about just ask them to do their job half the time? Meaning, like, let's say you you elect a senator. The minute they get there, they start raising money again. There was a study that said 1.1 million hours in the last Congress was spent raising money. Think if they weren't for just the half, 3 years, if they weren't raising money, what might they be doing? Attending committee hearings, talking to constituents, God forbid, building relationships across the aisle. So say once you get elected, you can't even file to start it for re-election or start a new committee until half your term's over. Then once you're done, once you're done with the campaign, you have to close out your campaign account. That's what we have to do in Montana. That way incumbents don't have that advantage. Give that remaining money to charity, give it to other folks. Look, I am the only governor left in this race. Many respects, some folks said I got in too late. I had a job to do. I told you about how we got Medicaid expansion through. We had to get it reauthorized because it's sunset, and they tried to reauthorize it by ballot initiative. Tobacco companies spent $26 million killing that reauthorization. So I knew before I could get in and do other things, I had to get that fixed. So worked with our Republican legislature. We got that through. I signed my last bill on a Monday, announced on a Tuesday. I think I was in Iowa by Thursday. But I think the intent was well with the DNC, but what they did is shifted so much of this debate into getting these individual $1 donors. So you had campaigns spending $60 and $80 online to get a $1 donor. I know that if it comes down to chasing 100,000 $1 donors or getting folks, 100,000 people health care, easiest decision I would ever make. And I still believe at the end of the day that it's not debates that decide this. It's actually Iowans that have always taken a big field and narrowed it down. And I know that you get a lot of folks trying to make some attenuated connection to Iowa, so I'm not even going to tell you that my great-great-grandparents settled in Henry County in 1850, true. Where my mother was born in Ottumwa, true. Because that's not what this is about. This is about, I think as Alex said, that it truly is the most important election in our lifetime. And it's more than about beating Donald Trump, though. It's about a 243-year experiment in representative democracy that is so deeply being challenged right now. It's about a post-World War II order where people could expect something, other countries could expect something of the United States of America. And that's being tested as well. If we can't win back places we lost, if we can't give people a reason to vote for us, not just against him, he can win again. I believe we can do this. I don't think it's going to be easy. Anybody that says this is an easy race to win ought to spend some time in rural Iowa or rural Montana or many of these places. I'm an optimist, though, that we can do it. I'm optimistic because 2 teenage daughters and a 13-year-old son, you have to be optimistic. But more than that, that's at the core of who we are as people. We know that we're at our best when all voices can be heard, not when we're divided into these warring camps. Or when some degree of civility and decency can replace the hostility and anger that we feel. Or that when anyone, no matter who their parents were, or what their zip code is, really believes that they do have that shot at the American dream or a better life. We can be that country again. It starts, oddly enough, 78 days from now, when Iowans first go to caucus. And I feel like I've learned a little bit, well, I've learned a lot from Iowans in my trips here. In many other things that I've learned that your first in the nation status, you don't take it as an entitlement, you take it as an obligation. An obligation to go through a large field and figure out what would actually be best, not only to win, but to govern. I've also learned about Iowa Nice. And Iowa Nice is, you're somewhere on my list. Was that list 17 or 3? I asked to get higher up on that list. Again, I so appreciate you all coming out on a Sunday night. Appreciate your active engagement, and I'd be happy to answer almost any question. Thanks so much.